Hi, I'm Sarah Cowgill, your host for this live roundup of the Democratic National Convention, a special edition of the Conservative Five brought to you by Liberty Nation News. Joining me today are some of the best political minds in the business: Tim Donner, John Clark, Dave Patterson, and Lisa K. Donner. We're going to discuss the highs and lows of that Chicago affair. Let's start with you, Tim Donner. Seems like opening night mission was to kick Joe to the curb and get him out of view before the Kamala Love Fest. What did you make of it?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that they pushed him about as late in the program as they possibly could. He was already scheduled to start at 10:50 on the first night, and he didn't even go to the stage till 11:30. I love the image of Nancy Pelosi, of all people, holding up the sign saying, "Thank you, Joe," after she had orchestrated a palace coup to get him out. He had no choice but to leave. So it's kind of a sad legacy, and he's got a lot on the line. As I wrote on libertynation.com, I think that Biden has more on the line here than Harris, because if Harris loses, nobody can blame her necessarily for inheriting the deficit that Joe Biden left her. But if she loses, Joe Biden will be blamed, and that will be his historical legacy, that he let Donald Trump back into the White House.
Well, that's an interesting point of view. I almost thought that maybe they were just setting her up and going, well, if she loses, then we get rid of her. But I don't
Well,
know.
that's possible too. I mean,
I wasn't a
look,
real big fan of what was going on.
it was about 2 months ago, no more than that, where there was serious talk about pulling her off the ticket
Right.
because she was at about 32% approval. And there was a thought that he could bump up his prospects by picking someone who was actually popular, unlike Kamala, who was more unpopular than Joe Biden. So pick your poison.
Well, I mean, she must have, Dave, you watched the enough of the both conventions, the big ones. What did you make of this year's efforts? I mean, did Harris rise to the occasion, or did everybody rise for her?
Well, I actually think that there's an historical perspective here that's kind of interesting in that the 2024 DNC convention, has been routinely compared with the 1968
Mm,
Democratic convention, primarily because of the protesters that the two have in common. But there are several, and I think more interesting similarities, actually. President Lyndon Johnson dropped out of the race as he did, and Joe Biden, and for similar reasons. Staff and Democratic insiders told Johnson that he couldn't win because of the Vietnam War and how poorly it was going, and it was a drag on his electability. Uh, Joe Biden dropped, or rather was pushed out, as Tim pointed out, because his Democratic colleagues were confident he couldn't win. Now, his vice president, Hubert Humphrey, Johnson's vice president, became the heir apparent. And voila, Biden's vice president, Kamala Harris, is now the standard bearer. So, in terms of comparing the two presidential candidates, Humphrey and Harris, that's where the similarities end, actually. Humphrey was a blue dog Democrat, center left. Harris is a radical liberal progressive, regardless of how she's trying to remake herself. Humphrey was willing to engage in issues with his highly knowledgeable inquisitors, down to the details and the latest administration thinking on national security.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he was willing to do that. Harris is not. Humphrey was intelligent and articulate, and, well, let's just say Humphrey was intelligent and articulate and leave it at that. But one of the most interesting things I think that took place was 2 weeks prior to the 1968 Democratic Convention. Vice President Humphrey sat down with CBS News correspondent George Herman, David Broder, and the Washington Post from the Washington Post, and Martin Agronsky from CBS News. Now, imagine this scene. You have Vice President Humphrey in a chair, and he's surrounded in a semicircle by his inquisitors. And the fact is that it was more of an interrogation than it was an interview. But nonetheless, Humphrey was not bested by any means. I mean, these were hardened network newsmen, and their questions were designed to see just what Humphrey was made of. And Humphrey proved to be a match for their questions. Well, now let's fast forward and think of VP Harris, what she would do in the same situation. Well, first, if she ever accepted such an interview at all, but since she has no personal accomplishments as Biden's VP, it would be very hard for her to mention those, although she's obviously done it, whether people believe her or not. She would have to defend the Biden-Harris policies and decisions. It is the Biden-Harris administration. You cannot paint over that. And remember, she's always the last person in the room. After the meeting, she said that. And when asked, were you the last person in the room on Afghanistan? Yes, I was. Do you agree with that position? Yes, I do. Well, that nuance kind of meant that she was the person that Biden listened to. Now, whether she was or not, that's anybody's guess, but that's her take on things. And the Afghanistan withdrawal, the failing economy, inflation, neighborhood crime, well, she owns it all. And remember, Humphrey won a contested Democratic convention and a nomination. And as strong as Humphrey was, he lost. So,
well,
and he lost because of LBJ. Just like
well, yeah,
Kamala,
I mean, the Vietnam War, the whole mess of '68, it was a mess.
But Tim, even though he was carrying around the legacy of LBJ, he never threw LBJ under the bus.
No, he didn't. But he had to carry the burden,
yes, absolutely,
of LBJ's Vietnam War record. And because he didn't separate himself, he was associated with that policy, and frankly would have lost a lot worse even if George Wallace hadn't been in the race and won 5 southern states that Nixon would have won. But that's how unpopular the Vietnam War was. And I think, too, that Kamala Harris has to carry the burden of the last 3.5 years of her administration. But she only has to do it for 3 months. She's trying to play 4 corners and run out the clock. And we'll see if the voters let her do that.
All right, but look here. Let me just add one thing. What she's got going on is a heavy lift. I was digging into some numbers, and apparently 29 of 49 vice presidents in the country have formally sought their nomination, but only 10 of the 29 have been elected to president. So that means that like 1/3 have actually been able to get the brass ring. So that tells you something. This is not an easy task. And she wasn't strong to begin with. Now, whether joy, hope, and namaste are going to, bring her over the top, I don't know.
I don't see that. But Lisa, I wanted to ask you what you thought of her speech specifically.
Well, she spent a lot of time on herself, which was kind of odd because the speeches leading up to her were her sister, her husband, and then they had a video and everybody watched the video. So everybody kind of knew who she was, but she spent a lot of time on herself. But that sort of made sense because what she was doing was she was introducing herself and then taking it off in a very feeling way. She was feeling.
She's been invisible for 3 years. I mean,
feeling joy and feeling, there wasn't any public policy in there. But people, I don't know how much people vote on public policy nowadays. We'll see that, won't we?
I guess we will. I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's high points and low points, and I know it was all about trying to convince those independents and, you know, sort of left of center folks to go all in on very hardcore left policies. And I don't see the country heading that direction. But you know, John Clark, what do you think? What did it work? Did this whole happy joy thing work?
I must say that I really love Liberty Nation News, but you have never asked me to do anything more difficult than watch this. It was very painful. It was schizophrenic. And there are so many things that go through my mind. And this is what I would say. And to compare it with Humphrey or other things in the past, this is not apples and apples. We have a different media. We have a completely different society that's been dumbed down by computers and phones and an active disinformation campaign, apparently, that we see even in ABC News is conflicted coverage, as I reported about it. And you see it in the headlines and the way they covered it. I'm reminded of this book, which I've mentioned, by Thomas Frank, who's a liberal writer who wrote years ago that if the Democratic Party became the party of we hate Trump with no policies and bailed on the middle class, which is what this subtitle is, and just pandered to elites, that it would fail. The question that I see in this DNC is, can you polish these falsehoods so much that you deceive people to get 4 more years of the same? Remember 4 years ago, the message, it's like they paused their social justice ideological onslaught for about 4 months. Joe Biden said he was going to be a uniter, and then we saw someone who was vilifying Americans. This DNC is conflicted between whether they're going to be a uniter or whether they're just going to be the party of not Trump and let's send the policies out the window. I thought it was interesting when her shallow personal story kept reciting her mom, who said, don't do anything half-assed. I'm not aware that this woman has ever risen up to that level of accomplishment of half-assed in her actual accomplishments. I hope it's all right that I'm repeating her term. She then quoted mom again and say that don't let other people define you, define yourself. Well, she tried to define Republicans. She said that Republicans hate America. I guess the Democrats are now flag wavers. She talked about equality, but not about equity. The whole thing was to me was schizophrenic and affirmed what I hope Thomas Frank was right about, that at least if given the policies in the end, voters would choose with the policies that were most beneficial to them rather than be, disillusioned, or I should say deceived into believing that these people are somehow going to deliver. And I thought that was augmented by President Obama, who did not lift her up, but I thought pulled himself down by just parroting all the same talking points, hypocrisy, lies, and projecting onto Republicans what they have become. I just don't know if it'll sell to Americans. The whole thing was a cringe fest of mediocrity and hypocrisy to me. One interesting quote from the Wall Street Journal says, so far, Kamala is a vessel for the triumph of hope over experience, whom Americans are expected to embrace mainly because she isn't Donald Trump. Not being Donald Trump is not a policy. We will see if Americans allow that one issue to dominate their vote in November. That's what I think the Democrat Party is trying to do at the same time that they try to polish their destructive policies into something beneficial for the working class, which it has not been. For AOC to say, after destroying all those jobs by Amazon in New York City, that she's there for the working class and conservatives are not, is just a new level of denial. So I just don't know whether voters will swallow these lipsticked pigs or not.
John, you used an interesting word. You used the word projecting. And I noticed that there was a lot of projection going on. Like Oprah Winfrey said, you know, we're not susceptible to the tricks and tropes. Well, what was more tricky and tropey than the Democratic National Convention? I mean, it really,
well, they had to. They had to dress it up. They had to bring in people to entertain, because otherwise they can't talk about anything that they've done.
With all due respect, John, to your statement that not being Trump is not enough. Well, in 2016, not being Trump didn't work, but in 2020 it did. Let's not forget that. And that's the reason, especially given the record of this administration, that's the reason.
I think there's
that
one
we are where we
yeah.
are with that. But, you just look at, there's a lot of talk about how she is not offering any policies, any specifics. But in fact, she's made, at this point, just two major decisions. Number one was her running mate, and number two was an economic policy. The running mate is about as far left as you can get, especially in the upper Midwest. Tim Walz is completely down with the 2020 Black Lives Matter agenda. The second decision was to announce that she was in favor of Venezuela-style price controls. I mean, that is flat out Marxist. So,
Right.
in fact, she is telling us who she is. She's telling us that given the choice to go to the center to appeal to more people or to go even further left, she has inexplicably chosen to go further left, apparently learning nothing from the lessons of George McGovern in 1972 or Walter Mondale in 1984 and on and on. Somebody that left wing cannot win unless this country's so different than it's been for the entirety of all of our lifetimes.
I think
Sarah,
one other
go ahead.
observation that I made or that I saw there that was worth talking about, and that is that whereas Harris gave a speech, everyone expected it. She kind of was true to form, but former President Barack Obama's speech was odd. It was as though the last 3.5 years were the Trump administration, not the Biden. And after pummeling Trump with the same old criticism, Obama said, "We don't need 4 more years of bluster and chaos. America is ready for a new chapter." But the last years were Biden-Harris administration, and they were bluster and chaos.
That's just a detail, Dave.
Okay, I just want to ask this.
And economic disaster.
Did anybody else notice the slot that former President Bill Clinton was stuffed into in the time frame?
Boy,
I mean,
did he
they had to
look
trot him
awful.
out. They had to trot him out, but they also have to go, okay, he's a Me Too problem. So it's
well,
like,
he
wow, that
looked,
was kind of a slap upside the head.
is it just me, or did he look like he's sort of on his last legs?
Yeah, he looks like he's 150, but
Yeah.
Well, to answer,
all those Big Macs have caught up with him.
I wanted to mention, Sarah, you asked me about her speech. I thought she really did a pretty good job. I mean,
Yeah.
she delivered it well. She knew when to look at the camera and when she could look at the teleprompter.
Well, she's okay on script, but get her off script and she resorts to the cackle.
Yeah, she delivered her lines well.
Well, let's remember this is a woman that ran for the highest legislative office in the land, the United States Senate. So she is used to a quasi-national campaign. She's had to make speeches for a long time. She ran for district attorney. She ran for Attorney General of California. So she's had a lot of experience on the stump. The question is, how will she handle things in a debate where you can't just spout talking points or read from a teleprompter? We don't know. We have our suspicions.
But I don't think it matters to the Democrats. I mean, joy, hope, and namaste.
Not to the Democrats any more than what Trump says matters to Republicans, but it does matter to the people in the middle. And there are people who are undecided. Make no mistake.
Especially now that, they just ripped old Biden out of there. That was their guy. And, I'm guessing some Democrats didn't like that.
And I'm thinking, Tim, you were taking issue with my suggestion that Thomas Frank could be right or wrong about, because I wasn't really taking a position. It remains to be seen. But, you mentioned 2020, which also has some issues about voting irregularities, and that somehow they won on, we're not Trump. Well, to the extent they did, maybe a lot of Americans have seen what an atrocious DEI social justice disaster that was. And maybe then, Thomas Frank will be right in the end, that the party needs to at some point offer voters some policies instead of a vibe. She says she's running on a vibe, Lisa, a namaste vibe, I guess. But at any rate, so we'll see. I don't disagree with you, Tim. I
well, you got records to compare. That's the thing that voters,
Democrat voters are people that run off their feelings. They don't even consider issues.
But voters
I feel it makes me feel
exactly
safe.
Sarah. That's exactly right.
It's that's not policy. That's not good for the order. That's good for you and your twisted mind. I don't know, but
research shows that those who run the positive campaigns have better success rate than those who run the negative campaigns.
Yep.
Well, Richard Nixon, who Dave invoked earlier, once said, and he was nothing if not a crafty politician, he once said, anytime there's a movement to stop somebody, go with the guy they're trying to stop, because that person usually wins the argument. So that may be true or not. I've always thought that it was true. But if you think about it, the voters this year have an unprecedented amount of information to vote on, because they have the Trump administration and they have the Biden-Harris administration. They can see very clearly what happened from 2017 to 21 and what happened from 21 to 24. It's no speculation. Joe Biden was just an idea in 2020. Now, it's a record, and Harris isn't going to be able to separate herself because she doesn't have the political skill to separate herself from the man who rescued her career by picking her for VP, same as Barack Obama rescued Biden's career by picking him for VP.
So you don't think, Tim, that Kamala Harris can pull herself in a direction that distance herself from the reality of what she did or didn't do over the last 3.5 years and the hopey-changey world in which they're trying to project her?
Well, the hope and change, the problem with trying to put her in that context is that in 2008, George W. Bush had become an extremely unpopular president. We'd gone through a financial meltdown. We'd gone through an extremely unpopular Iraqi war. People were ready to change from George W. Bush to Barack Obama. This is not a change election for Kamala Harris. Instead of saying we need to get rid of the Trump administration, since they already did, they can't do that. They have to try and run away from their actual record. That's an extremely difficult thing to do, even for someone who's a very skilled and popular politician.
But Tim, make no mistake about it. This is a slick, smooth repackaging of someone.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, it's been brilliant so far.
Depends on which media the voters watch.
Look, the race is just now beginning, people. Conventions are not reality. Conventions are not what the average person sees as the reality of their lives. Their lives are rising prices, inflation, worries about crime. Mm-hmm. I know, Lisa, you've talked about this, and your girlfriends, and I've talked to women too. They're afraid to go out by themselves. It's reached a point where so many women that I've talked to say, I won't go out alone. I said, yeah, at night, that makes sense. They say no, even during the day.
Well, geez, I mean, there's 18 million more people, give or take a million or two, that have come from, across the border, north and south, and they mostly pick on women. I mean, the rapes, the murders.
Yes. They pick on the weakest.
Right. Children are being picked on.
Women and children.
I thought that it was an interesting take on that particular subject when Trump came out and said he would advocate the death penalty for people who traffic in children. And, that will have resonance with a lot of people.
Well, a lot of people, right now don't seem to care. I traveled recently on I-40, and it is the corridor of human trafficking. And you just don't know. You don't know. And there's signs up everywhere, but who's going to let a trafficked young woman go into the bathroom alone? That doesn't happen. And there's who's going to give her a phone to call for help? So nobody seems to be doing much of anything. I mean, states are kind of trying to get in there. Our federal government hasn't done anything.
Well, how
This is
much
a
can
problem.
they lie about the problems they've created? One of the things that struck me was the repeated references to that important border issue. And Kamala Harris touted her record as a prosecutor to say, that's why I know how important borders are. You fought awfully hard to tear down the barbed wire fence that Texas tried to put up. You fought them in court. And then Obama came on stage and said, and I quote, referring to Trump, he killed the immigration deal. He thought trying to actually solve the problem would hurt his campaign. And she said he wants to cut taxes, or Obama said he wants to cut taxes so that his tax bill will go down. What people would agree, believe these kinds of, again, projection? How about bold-faced lies about the immigration issue? We see the consequences and we know
John, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
It
These
doesn't.
people who say things to encourage their base, and their base will suck it up no matter what they say.
Apparently. But what about the independent voters who are not their base, is what I'm saying. I think a lot of Americans in the middle are going, what psilocybin substance are these people on? Do they think Biden has still got a good brain too? So anyway,
I think that what has to happen is that this, you have to take it to the people. So you have to keep emphasizing and pushing. When you go to the grocery store, does a loaf of bread cost you today what it cost you 4 years ago? No, it doesn't. It costs between 2 and 4 times as much. And then click down all of the things that go to impact individuals' lives, that make them less reasonable and less comfortable than they were. That's where you just have
That's how Clinton, the random guy from Arkansas, kicked George H.W. Bush's rear end.
I feel your pain.
Flat out. You know how much a loaf of bread costs? And no, he didn't. He didn't know.
You should compare the 1992 Democratic Party platform, or even 96, to the one of this year, and it bears no resemblance.
Right.
The Bill Clinton Democratic platform was essentially centered around that idea, which is now laughable, that the era of big government is over. We see how far that went. We now have a bigger government than ever. But in looking at this race, there's 2 other races come to mind. Dave talked about 1968, and that's a good analogy of a candidate that stuck with the record of the guy at the top of the ticket who quit, which is what Kamala Harris has to do. But there's 2 others that come to mind. First was 1980, when it seemed a week before the election, Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan were essentially tied. They were within a point or 2 of each other. And then on the last week, it's like nothing I've ever seen. The dam just burst, and Carter lost in a landslide, because when it comes down to the end and people are undecided, they generally vote against the incumbent. And that's what happened this year. And last year, in Reagan won 45 states. And then in 1988, this is instructive too. I think Republicans were extremely worried coming out of that Democratic National Convention, just as they are now, because Michael Dukakis had a 17-point lead after his convention in August. It might have been July. 17-point lead, and he lost by 8 points. So appearances can be deceiving in the summer before an election.
Well, it's interesting.
I think that was the tank incident, Tim.
Yeah.
Well, that's,
Yeah, that had to do
I
it.
don't know if that cost him all 25 points, but
It's
it
the
cost him a
dumbest
lot
thing
of
I've
them.
ever seen.
Yes.
Okay, but John brought up independent voters, and I want to talk to you, Sarah, because you're in touch with independent voters. You spent some time, real quality time with them. Do you think they are so non-Trump? I mean, are they, tainted with the TDS virus, or do you think they're still open to him?
To some degree, I will tell you that people are disappointed in the fact that RFK Jr. may drop out of the race. And we are going to be talking about that after he makes his announcement today, live again at around 3 o'clock. So stay tuned. But that disappointment hasn't really said, nope, then I'll have to vote for Harris, because I can't stand the orange man. It's brought them back to thinking about similar policies and what's best for the country. And if what's best for the country, it's not Harris Walz. What's best for the country would be probably a more dialed down version of a Trump administration with a lot of different facets. You bring in a Tulsi Gabbard, you bring in random people. They're not just these,
Conservative Republicans.
hardcore right.
Yep.
And maybe that's where they're trying to go with this. And that would be attractive.
I'm not so sure. I mean, I don't want to be the odd person out here, but the conservative mindset is that we want conservative values, we want conservative positions, we want less government, lower taxes, and those are not positions that Tulsi Gabbard, as much as I like her and think that she's a pretty swell person, these are not positions that people who are more close to the center actually embrace.
Right.
Yeah,
But
but do they embrace a Harris Walz? I mean,
I think one of the things that
very far left.
One of the things that Donald Trump never learned, or he always refused to do it, was to expand his base rather than just doubling down and making already loyal supporters doubly loyal. But he never made an attempt. As somebody once said, politics is about addition, not subtraction.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think what the Trump campaign is hoping for is that RFK Jr. will withdraw and will endorse him. And we're also hearing rumblings, and that's all it is, but it's probably worth reporting, that the Libertarians are reportedly considering following suit to RFK and joining forces with Trump. So if you took the Libertarians and you took RFK, which is all theoretical at the moment, that's a pretty stinging blow to Kamala Harris, because most of the polling surprisingly shows that RFK was pulling more from Trump than from Biden or Harris.
4-minute warning, Sarah.
Which is why perhaps if he pulls out, that's going to push more people to Trump. There's a report out there today. But also, I think what's really interesting about RFK is, regardless of what he says or who he endorses, his experience is a physical demonstration of this party, the Democratic Party's undemocratic, almost monarchic support for their chosen ones. It was Hillary Clinton, it was Joe Biden, now it's Kamala Harris. What they have done to Robert Kennedy is just absolutely amazing, to keep him off of ballots, to keep him from having Secret Service protection. And he's
unbelievable. It's unbelievable.
So all he has to do is, his supporters just see that, and they might be moving towards the right as a lesser of evils, because they're seeing, as Thomas Frank pointed out, this is not the party of Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton brought welfare to work.
This is not the party that supports democracy in any way, shape, or form.
More than that, ladies and gentlemen, this is not a party that is liberal. And we should we should stop calling them that, because they are liberal implies open-minded, flexible. These people are not liberal.
They're closed down.
They are.
Their way or the highway.
They're
They are radical progressives.
They're
All right, guys,
quasi-Marxists. They're quasi-Marxists.
Well,
is where the energy of that party is now.
That's another thing. When they put up a fence to block Palestinian protesters from the DNC, a kind of an interesting contrast with the
I'm
fence.
sorry, three fences. Three fences.
Three layers.
Three fences. Okay, but they didn't just block out the extremists. They blocked out the Kennedy supporters. They blocked out the Bernie supporters. They blocked out the traditional Democrats. And I'm just curious how many people within that party are going to see that they've been lied to, and they're going to get more fracturing and more extremism once the vote's over, just like they saw with Biden. So I just think that they're bleeding from many places right now. And if Kennedy jumps into the fray, it's going to hurt them. It's going to be another wound and expose more Achilles.
And it'll take all the away from the convention. You know,
the pro-Palestinian protesters somehow got maggots into the convention. I mean, somebody made it in there.
Hey, that's the high protein diet. That is all a good thing. We need to get rid of cows. We need to save the planet. Everybody.
I bet you nobody ate them. Bet you nobody ate them. But, you know, I don't know. I wasn't there.
Scrumptious.
Okay, guys, look.
I thought it was a Babylon Bee story. I mean, I didn't even.
I thought it was too. I'm like, oh, that's not good.
I had to look at it.
We're going to get close to wrapping it up. So I have one last official, unofficial question, or, you know, use your time. You're going to go around the horn. Use your time if you want to just make a statement, or tell me, did this convention, in all of its pageantry and, as Lisa says, love, hope, namaste, or joy, hope, whatever. Sorry, Lisa, I forgot what you said.
Close enough. Joy, hope.
Okay. Yeah, didn't quite catch that one. Is that going to give her the bump that she needs? Did it help her, or did it just fizzle? Go ahead, Tim, start.
Well, I think you've got a vibe and you've got a vision. The vibe is what we experienced, the orchestrated vibe and love fest at the convention, which is fine. They're supposed to be putting on a show, so fine. But the vibe has to be followed up by some kind of vision of what a Harris presidency would look like, and nobody has that idea yet. We'll start to find out more on September 10th when they debate, but I wouldn't place much importance on this convention, nor on the bump that Kamala Harris has gotten, because it's just a bunch of repressed Democrats who were saddened and infuriated by Joe Biden. And now, look, Joe Biden won by not being Donald Trump. Kamala Harris is being congratulated for not being Joe Biden. But that's not going to be enough to win the election.
Okay, Clar, you got your 30 seconds. Tell us what you think.
I will answer very strongly that I don't know. Because I think, as we've discussed here, there are a lot of, we've talked about past elections, but this is not your parents, let alone your grandparents' election. So we've seen all this pomp over policy. We saw a little policy come out now in the latest rounds. And yeah, she did a great job, Lisa, by the way, because it contrasted with all of her abysmal performances. When the standard is that low, it's kind of like people tell me I'm usually as a farmer, and then I put on the deal, well, you clean up nicely,
Yeah.
The bar was low.
I never said that, John.
It's just about 100 other people. And again, I do it on purpose by looking, scrubby all the time. Then you get all kinds of unmerited compliments. But
nice strategy.
Don't know is that what we've witnessed in America for a number of years now is a cult-like ideology that is anti-American, anti-Western, anti-everything good. It's identity politics. It's cultish. So this is a wild card. For me, am I persuaded to vote for these people? I can tell you, I look at the facts and I dig. I'm not sure a lot of Americans in this day and age do. So I really don't know if in the end they will pull it off, Tim, and just go, I ain't Trump, vote for me. Nothing else matters. Your wallet doesn't matter. The truth doesn't matter. The borders don't matter. World wars don't matter. Just don't vote for that man. And
right,
but Trump, know in a cult what cultists do. I think it's going to be up to the independents. I think it's going to be up to the middle.
Well, what Trump has going for him is that people are reminded of the chief liability of the Harris campaign every time they go to the store, every time they buy a loaf of bread. every
True.
time they pump a gallon of gas, every time they look at mortgage rates, every time they look at their credit card debt, every time they look at how far $100 can go compared to what it did 4 years ago. These
Right.
are
Dave, you are
this
up.
is self-interest.
What? Trump.
Okay, Sarah's trying to get to the end.
Sorry,
So
I
go
got
ahead.
to tell you to zip it. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Dave.
Okay.
Dave, you're up.
So,
You've got less time now, but go ahead.
Zipped.
It's okay. I deserve less time. I think there's one thing that I've mentioned it before, and I think that it's very important, and that is that when you look back at campaigns that emphasize we are here for the worker, we are here for the worker, and that happened with Nixon particularly, it happened with Reagan, and now it's happened in this campaign. The Democrats have said they're for the worker, but have only the leadership of the major unions have been for the Democrats. The rank and file have completely abandoned the leadership when the Democratic Party did not invite a single labor union leader to speak. That spoke volumes to the rank and file. And when Trump not only invited, but complimented highly Sean O'Brien from the Teamsters Union, 1.3 million Teamsters is not nothing.
That's it for our live DNC convention Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform, YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble, and of course X. We're on them all. As well, Liberty Nation News has its own Roku and Amazon Fire channels where you can see all of our TV productions. I'm your host, Sarah Cowgill. Thanks for joining us today for Free Thinking, Free Speech, LibertyNation.com.